Welcome to our latest webinar here at Ethos CRS. Our topic today is leadership in uncertain and changing times. We're going to be examining leaders and aspects of leadership, good, bad, and indifferent. And our panel, each of them is a leader. They'll provide insights based on their practical experience and knowledge. We're also going to be taking questions from you, our viewers. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom window. So anytime while we're discussing this topic, feel free to ask questions in that section. So to our panel today, we have Fran Freeman, who's a First Assistant Secretary in the Commonwealth Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, that's OR. Barb Livesey, who's the Executive Director of Gapp Consulting and a former CEO of Reconciliation Australia, and Chaz Savage, last but not least, the founder and CEO of Ethos CRS, where we are meeting today. First question, if we try to list the characteristics of a good leader, each of us will come up with 10 characteristics in 10 seconds. But I'd really like to try and narrow it down to the most important that each of you think is the case. Barb, we'll start with you. Top 5.
And I have a list of 10 on my website. So as an executive coach, I often get asked this question. And when I thought about the list, I thought there's 3 things, I think, that are really important. One is who you are as a person. So that's about your ethics. Do you show your vulnerabilities? What qualities do you have as a person? The second is about how you work with your team. And that's about collaboration and understanding the people you're working with. And the third is what do you actually do? And you do less, delegate more, and plan for your succession. You do a few other things, but they're my top priorities.
Okay. We will come back to each of those as we go through in the next half an hour. Chaz, what about you? Well, let's narrow it down from 5 to 3.
All right. So I really like the idea of knowing oneself. You can't change, you can't improve, you can't respond if you're not aware of your own behaviour and the impact of your behaviour on others. So that's the first thing. I would separate out ethics. I have a particular model of leadership that is founded on the idea of being tough, being clear, but being honourable and ethical in behaviour. The third thing I pick up Barb's point is it's actually not about you, it's about the team and the success of the team. And so a good leader hands over to a team the flexibility, the resources, the support that enable them to flourish, but also does it within very clearly defined boundaries, sets expectations, sets standards, and has the team flourish within those boundaries.
Fran, what about you? Would you
Well,
agree?
I agree with all of the above. I think a couple of ones for me is on sort of knowing your limits as well. And really knowing what boundary you can operate in and how you can influence. So really also an ability to influence whomever it might be, but that you bring people with you, whether in a sort of 360 degrees, I think is important. A sense of humour. I know that sounds sort of trite, but I can't begin to emphasise when people are really under the gun, as people are now, that thing of actually being able to know when to use a bit of levity it sounds silly, but it actually shows you're a member of the human race. So
do you think some people are scared to show that? Is that equated with vulnerability, perhaps?
I think it's just one about knowing when things are really serious and when okay, let's get perspective, because I think leaders, it's also the job of the leader to bring some perspective. The sky might appear to be falling today, but chances are it won't. And so it's actually that perspective to actually bring to people, and sometimes a bit of humour. Everyone always quotes me at work, nobody died today, so it's actually bringing that sense of, okay, let's get this in perspective, what do we all need to do, and I think that's really important too.
Does good leadership change as the circumstances change, which, let's face it, in the last 6 months we've been struck by massive changes. And how does that happen? How is that manifested, Chaz?
Absolutely. Leadership is grounded in context. So if you're not responding to the demands of the time, then you're just on autopilot with no self-awareness and no understanding of what pressures are being put on the team. So context is everything, and responding and anticipating is absolutely the bedrock of someone who's on top of their game.
I sort of agree in that you've got to adjust, but I think the fundamentals of leadership are still there, and I assume you're saying that too. So there's the sort of big picture now of, the world's gone to hell in a basket, and how do we deal with that? But also, I guess, for organisations, it's where you are in the maturity of your organisation and team. So when I started as a CEO, it was very different in terms of what I had to focus on, I guess, compared to once we'd been going a couple of years. So it's understanding also where your team's at in terms of their maturity, and responding to that, I think, is really important.
I think that point that you just raised, and I'll let Fran answer this one. How do you think you've changed as a leader? Because you've developed.
Absolutely, and I think you learn from your mistakes as well. I mean, I think the point that was made about understanding your impact on others. Like I'm at the moment in these really difficult times acutely aware, we're responsible for delivering a critical functions during a pandemic. And so there's the BAU that we do normally.
Business as usual?
Yeah, sorry. Apologies for the acronym. But life goes on, and exports still have to leave the country, and we obviously have to regulate that. But there's a limit to what people can do, and I see very much at the moment it's about helping people work within their limits. I think the time at the moment is managing uncertainty for yourself as well. And I think we all have lives as well, and we're all members of the human race. And so, in my circumstance, very elderly parents in a nursing home, you can't get in there. We all have to manage our own worlds. And I think showing that bit of humanity, I think, is really important to people see that we're all in this together as well. I think the other one is that it's actually, some people manage uncertainty much better than others. And I think some people just go with, oh, well, tomorrow's another day, and, we'll manage it as it comes. Whereas other people really want to know, I'm going to sit in this chair, I'm going to have this computer, and I'm going to have this. And it's actually, you need to, whilst that mightn't be your characteristics, you can't dismiss how much some of that stuff matters to others. And so it's about, again, back to that perspective, I think.
Barb and Chaz, how do you think you two have developed as leaders over decades?
I think we aspire to be good leaders, and God, if I knew now, if I knew then what I know now, I would have been much better. So
Barb just stole my line.
Yeah,
but it's so true.
We're sitting here as sort of middle-aged, middle class white people, isn't, and we have some wisdom, but diversity, I suppose, is one of my big lessons, that it wasn't about having necessarily just diversity of age, gender, background, etc., but diversity of views and people who are going to think differently to me. It's a bit like going, I assume everyone thinks the same way as me. No, they don't. And the other one that came sort of, I think, much later for me was about it's okay to expose your vulnerabilities. I thought being a leader meant sort of being strong, and I've learned that connection with people, showing your vulnerabilities is hugely important. Because it makes you human, and because it says it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to ask questions. I had a friend yesterday saying to me she'd just they'd been in a departmental forum, and she'd put up some questions online that were about how things were being managed in this current situation. And she started getting messages from people commending her for being brave enough to ask the questions. And I thought, wow, if they haven't created a culture where people feel brave enough and it's okay, we're all in this together, we're all going to make mistakes, ask, etc.
Chaz, what about you? What have you learnt in the last
Well, I
couple of
agree
decades?
with Barb about her comment about diversity. So I'm acutely aware of who I am and my strengths and limitations, and I'm not going to give you the percentages, but I'm aware that I really need a diverse team of smart people around me to actually make the company flourish. So that's the first thing. The other thing I've learned is hope is not a solution. So my job increasingly is not about the day-to-day things, although that's important, but my job is, where are we in 3 months? Where are we in 6 months? And what do I have to do to anticipate and prepare? So, and by doing that, it enables me to be grounded in the everyday. The good example was for our company, March 1, we were looking at a record year. March 15, it was as though we were involved in the siege of Stalingrad. We couldn't imagine worse circumstances. The most precious resource of this company is the people, the team that I have. And so I had to be honest with the team about where we were going, and confident in how I spoke, because the team doesn't want to know that there's no future, there's no hope. Their own personal circumstances are going to be shot to pieces. So that act of predicting ahead enabled me to speak as honestly and carefully as possible with a team who was entitled to know what the future for them held. And 10 years ago, I didn't have that. I was strictly operational.
Is that, if I may, I think it's really important to not gild the lily. I think people, you need to act out sort of honestly, but also it's okay to say, I don't know. I think that's the other one, that you haven't got the crystal ball as well.
The thing about this is it can't be episodic. I'm honest and frank, one day a year. The reason why the team trusted, and I still have an intact team, is because, in a sense, how we related, in my mind at least, hadn't changed all that much. And so it's actually the consistent setting of standards and behaviours and how you interact. That's my main job.
I think the other one is not, I think in terms of the evolution about, you're not there to win a popularity contest. I think that's the other one. Once upon a time when you were, when you gradually get promoted up the greasy pole and you realise that these people are your friends, as well, and then gradually, well, I'm the boss, and then I'm, and as you go up, and it's actually, you're not doing anyone any favours by playing that card. I think you just sell everybody short as well.
So can a good leader, let me rephrase that, is a good leader a good person?
Not necessarily, no. If you come back to my 3 things, it's the good person, how they do it and what they do. And I worked with the most gorgeous human being who was a leader in a leadership role, ethical, empathic, kind, exposed their vulnerabilities, did all those things that I would like to see. Couldn't make a decision, couldn't provide that strategic clarity, and as a result, the team floundered. So, no, you've got to kind of put them together and not just be a good person. And I often say having the difficult conversation is something you've got to be able to do too, and that for me is kindness to the rest of the team. If you're not managing, underperformance and things, you're not being kind. But some people struggle with that.
Yeah, but that's a characteristic of a good person, really, who's able to do that.
Yes, but sometimes the caring for people comes out in the wrong way, perhaps.
But good leaders can also behave badly too. I think that's the other one. No one's perfect.
No, we're always learning.
Can a good leader be a bad person? I think we know the answer to that.
I think we do. But I think I mean, I don't know what a bad person is versus a good person, but I think it's you do have people who potentially might behave badly can lead under certain, can show attributes of leadership too. Occasionally, can they sustain it's another matter. I think is.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
So Barb's point: a good leader is not necessarily a good person is not necessarily a good leader.
Yeah.
A bad person can be a good leader.
Yeah.
But bad people break organisations.
Yeah.
Because the culture that create, which is essential to performance, actually is undermined. A bad person privileges presumably dishonest behaviour, the telling of untruths, manipulation, and internecine politics, rather than a collaborative culture of performance. And you can do that for a while. But after a while, you end in a bunker and it all ends badly.
But is there something in there about a bad manager and a good leader? Or is there something, if you broke that down, because I think there's a big difference between good leadership and good management. And the two do not necessarily go hand in hand. And I've known some bad managers in my day who actually have some quite good leadership attributes and vice versa. I don't know what others' view on that one is.
Yeah, I think for me the difference, and people always, it's an interview question, isn't it? What's the difference between management and leadership? And I kind of try not to get too hung up about it because they're sort of together. But the leader is the one who is inspiring the team and providing that strategic clarity with the team. Whereas the manager, and you, as you said, looking ahead, in that way, the manager is more, in my head, managing the day-to-day.
The day-to-day, I'd agree with that.
For me, leadership tells you where you want to go, and it can be in a particular role. So I'm not talking about a prime minister or a chief executive officer or someone who runs an organisation. It can be someone in a particular role who discovers there is a way to do things better and who galvanise change in a team. A manager really tells you how to get there efficiently. Here are the nuts and bolts, here are the boundaries. Let's do really well within these tight parameters.
If we look at the issue of bad leadership, what would you suggest people in a workplace do to cope with someone who is a bad leader? Not a bad person, but a bad leader. What's the best way of tackling that?
I think it's hard, and that goes to what's the culture of the organisation to challenge or to question, because I think it's often you're not doing anyone any favours if everybody knows there's bad leadership and no one will put their head above the parapet. I mean, I think that's just chickening out. I do think you get to a point where if 15 people have put their head above the parapet and it's all got shot off, then you've got another quandary to tackle on a much bigger scale. I think I guess I have the philosophy of maybe I've been around too long, of actually never working for idiots anymore. Like I think it's like people do have choices, and sometimes I think they don't think they do. And if you've tried sort of in terms of calling it out or influencing, or have you tried this, or getting coalitions to try and help manage it, or all the different techniques that you might be able to use. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with you, I think, and you just think, well, what choices do I have? And I might exercise them.
Is it easier to say that when you're a first assistant secretary rather than someone way
No,
down?
I'd almost sometimes say it. Well, I don't think it's easy any time, but it sort of gets a bit narrower the higher you go up, and in terms of who, it can sometimes be harder, I would say, sometimes, Kate.
I don't know. I mean, again, in my coaching, it's a question that comes up all the time, and people sometimes don't have, or they have very limited choices. If you've got a staff freeze on, you can't just move somewhere easily. You need income, you can't quit the job or whatever. So I try to say to people, there's a few things. You've got three choices. One is work with them.
Yep.
One is report them, and the third is leave. And, I've done all three of those in my career. You've got to understand the person to begin with, what's motivating them, what's going on for them, because, as a first assistant secretary, you're getting lots of pressure from above that people mightn't fully appreciate or understand. I'm not saying you're a bad leader, I'm saying, understanding.
I'll just drop that.
The context. And then be a good leader yourself. Yep. So do what you can within your team. And try and stay one step ahead and try and be clear about expectations with the bad leader. So look, this is what I expect of you, and I've got some issues in that I'm not getting it. And if you're not, then, I have been in the situation where I've gone to the boss above me. And if they take action, good, and if they don't, then you make your choices.
Following on from that, how do good leaders support their team in times like this? What exactly do they do when times are challenging, uncertain, difficult?
I think you've got to know what's realistic. So everybody can turn the dial up to 11 for a week or 2 weeks. But if an organisation is to perform for a long period of time, you've got to know what realistically can be done. And if demands are excessive, if demands break your team and compromise the output of your team, then that's a really important role for you. Put your hand up. You're paid because you actually have to tell the world around you that the ship is not sailing as it should. So that's the first thing, I think, for me, most important.
I think what I've really noticed is with people working from home, how much pressure has been on my EL 1s and 2s as managing middle management, managing teams, and they are, in many respects, the engine room of a department. Many of them have school-age children, so they are parents first and foremost, and so they have been by far and away the most stressed cohort of staff I've had, and it's been about, I've seen my role as, it's okay that you're not getting this stuff done. It's actually okay. My only request to you is that you tell me or your manager that something's not getting done, and we'll figure out what then we have to prioritise and what gets jettisoned or postponed or put on the shelf. Because I think I've noticed that these people have tried to be good EL2s or good directors, but they're trying to be good parents, and they are so stressed out. And that has been, to me, what has really stood out from recent circumstances. And my one is just it's okay. It's okay. We are in really weird times. It's okay that you can't get all the stuff done that you normally get done. And it's actually almost giving them permission. And the sigh of relief now that schools have gone back has been just palpable across the burbs. And my heart's gone out to them, because they're really good people trying to do their best, but you can't expect them to keep doing it. And so something's got to give. And I think as a leader, your job is to actually give them permission to say something's got to give. The other one is we're all working remotely and the IT doesn't work, or the something doesn't work. Does the world end because the Skype connection's not working? No. I think it's some of that perspective as well, that everyone's getting toey. Well, you've got everyone working around, just the world hasn't ended. And I think some of that, again, that's a bugger. But, let's find plan B. Yeah.
Would you agree broadly with these?
Yeah, and again, I see people struggling with it. There was a really good Harvard Business Review article on exactly that point, that it's the middle managers who are feeling really squeezed, because every organisation has had to change. And I think the demand coming from the top to do that has been, big. And they're managing family and lives. So I think understanding your team, if you've got a team of people who have introverted preferences, they're going to love being at home. If you've got people who have extroversion preferences, they're going to be climbing the walls. And so understanding that, and understanding, I've been working with another team where, some people need structure. and the world is, we're looking at, you know, uncertainty and fragility for a long time now. So how do you help those people build the structure that they need?
And I think the flexibility.
And I think the other big one in any change is communication. So communicate till people are sick of hearing what it is you're saying. Because, you know, even if you've got nothing to tell them, sometimes saying to people, I can't tell you anything today because nothing's changed.
We'll pick up that point on introverts and extroverts. We think of political leaders typically as having big, strong personalities. What about workplace leaders? Can a quiet leader be as successful as the big alpha personality? Chaz?
Absolutely. So I've had a variety of people who've performed as directors. Some have been extroverts, some have been introverts, calm, quiet and collected. And I've seen both do fantastic jobs because they've applied different skills. That's mean I've had to adjust it in certain ways. So the issue about working with people is, you know, you have to adjust your style so that your strengths are complementing the deficiencies in another, or your own weaknesses admitted to are reinforced and supported by the expertise of a team. So volume is not quality. It's not a metric.
No.
So that idea of being calm and quiet and collected absolutely can generate results, and I've seen that.
Is it harder, Barb, is it harder for a quiet leader?
I think so. I mean, I agree with everything you say, but I think traditionally we've had a model of leadership, haven't we, that is the kind of charismatic extrovert.
Started that.
Authoritative sort of,
and they're assertive and they speak up and things. So I actually have a book here called Quiet. I think it's How to Find Your Voice: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking.
Who's the author, Barb?
Susan Cain.
Is it?
On the side of
Oh, good. Yeah, it's in white, so it's very. Yeah, Susan Cain. Susan Cain.
And invisible.
Yeah, that's right. And we often think quiet people are invisible, but you know, I've got something to say. I have ideas. I have leadership qualities, but I express them differently. And so I think finding a way to do that is often a challenge in an extroverted world and in Western culture, I'd say. So, you know, I've worked with a lot of Aboriginal people and leaders, and I can think of someone like Mick Dodson who uses the power of silence extraordinarily well and is very softly spoken. But you stop and listen when Mick speaks, don't you? You know that. Yeah.
I was just about to say it's that listening. It is such a critical skill as a leader, and also how you influence. It's the ability to influence, and what influences is often sometimes that sort of the traditional one actually is not necessarily the job for the day. And you actually
struggle,
to do that, and so it's like that. What's actually going to get through, and I think it definitely varies. I think the other one is like the makeup of teams really varies, and so I think if you did a straw poll, you know, across the different teams that I'd have, some would be completely fine with it. Others would be more looking to a more traditional model. But so I find it can vary, but there's certainly no reason why not.
So exactly what should a quiet leader do differently or a quiet person do differently to become a good quiet leader? How do they have to behave
Is it any
differently?
different to knowing any of your other strengths and weaknesses as well? I mean, is that, I'd probably put it maybe, Kate, in that same thing to say, you know, I might be innumerate or something, so I need to make sure that there's someone nearby who can actually know one number from another. And if this is like, well, I'm softly spoken or I'm whatever, how do I get my voice heard, either literally or figuratively? I think, is it the same? What do you do?
Quiet doesn't mean silent.
No.
Or invisible. Or inactive. So if I'm quiet, and I'm not having conversations. Quietly spoken, the volume's down. They're careful, they're thoughtful, they're organised. Then I'm not doing my job. So it's really important for an introvert to understand their strengths and weaknesses and what the demands of a role are, just as an extrovert has to turn the volume down and listen to other people.
Do you think an extrovert is less likely to know their weaknesses?
As a general rule, Australian boys make the supposition that what they have to say is intrinsically valuable. I'm a victim of that bias, and
I've moved past that. I think
as an extrovert, yeah, you naturally think that what you say is just fantastic, and I don't know if that's true.
You think?
But knowing that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think, for extroverts, learning to listen, but for introverts, it's finding ways that they're comfortable with expressing themselves. And it might be in writing, it might be in small groups. When it comes to leadership, your point, Chaz, is you might talk quietly and that's people will still listen to you. But I think for many women, it's how do I influence effectively so that people see me as a leader, because actually it's not that I'm quiet, I lack confidence in certain situations. And so then we talk about, well, how to build your confidence and find your voice. It's just, I have people who say, I've got to go and talk to the executive and I'm terrified, because you assume they're all smart. They're probably a lot of men sitting around the table. And so, giving people tips on how to do that and how to build that influence.
We're going to start to take questions from our viewers, and it'd be interesting to see what questions people have come up with. Our first question, I'm not quite sure who this is from, but the first question is, what is the difference between a good leader and a good manager, which Barb, I think you touched on earlier. Would you like to answer that question?
So I think Chaz actually said it before. It's about, you're at more at the perhaps operational management level when you're managing. When you're leading, you are providing that strategic clarity and some sense of direction with the team. You don't do that on your own. You build it with the team. But as I said, I don't get too hung up on the difference, because I think you can lead in a management role. Like anyone can show leadership qualities.
The public service really makes a big distinction here, doesn't it, about leadership and management? So, Fran, how would you
and they sort of tend to throw them together, that you often need to have both, as it's sort of taken as a given. And I think it's understanding that difference, I think, is important. But I mean, in my view, it actually doesn't matter whether you're in charge of doing job X, that there will be some of those skills, those leadership skills required, as well as actually the expectation that you're managing and getting the job done with or without a team. So I think it's actually knowing the difference almost. I mean, you're quite right, the public service does certainly dwell, I think traditionally has always dwelled on those. I think the question is then also investing in the ability to do both as well, which I think is also a really important one the public services has been under a lot of pressure. Obviously, we've had bushfires, we've got COVID, there's a whole range of things going on, and it's about that ability to adapt and deliver about what people need. And in some ways, it's really sort of coming into its own in terms of it's had those skills, people with those skills for a long time, and now it's really got to demonstrate it and move adroitly. But a lot of it is just building on the foundations that are already there.
Mm-hmm. Chaz, are you interested in taking that up? Or
Look, I think
in agreement? Good.
Really good answers.
Another question. How do leaders balance the team's welfare and the drive for doing well in business? So you two are in business. How do you balance the team's welfare? I think we've touched on this.
Yeah.
You don't want to kill them.
My first obligation in business is actually to the success of the company. So whatever I do, in law, I'm required to assure, as it happens, that the company is successfully trading. To do that, I draw on a really competent team and have to protect that team so that we succeed. So there's a couple of ways we protect the team. The first is to define systems and processes and all the underpinning supports. The second thing is to set direction. The third thing is to protect the team in where it runs off the rails from itself. So part of my job is to have those conversations that just maintain our integrity as a team that looks after each other, but not allow behaviour and not walk past behaviour that is against the good working of the team and against the successful operation of the company.
Which is about setting those really clear expectations early on. And I think if you have clear expectations, then you're dealing with the needs of the organisation and the needs of your team at the same time. And I think that was my biggest learning at Reconciliation Australia. I mean, now I'm a team of one and I look after myself and the organisation together. But at Reconciliation Australia, it was where I learned that you had to have those conversations with people where you were saying, this is what I expect because it's in the interests of the organisation.
You need to repeat your expectations regularly?
Yes, absolutely.
How regularly? Or does it depend on the circumstances?
Depends on circumstances, but repetition underpins understanding. You know, people move, roles change, teams change, circumstances change, but the standards we apply, the expectations that we have of each other, how we work together don't, in large part. You can't have a difficult conversation with an individual if you ambush them by not explicitly stating expectations. Those standards are just so important.
Let's go to another question. This is a simple, powerful question. Why do leaders fail? Who wants to take that one? Fran?
They're human, for a start. I think they can get caught out like anybody else, I think. You know, we went through that list of attributes before, and I think no one's on all the time, and leaders aren't perfect, you know, and leaders make mistakes. And sometimes you hope that when they make mistakes, they become better leaders as a result. But I think to actually think you're infallible or you'll never stuff it up, or, you know, in many cases, you're making a judgment call, and sometimes you mightn't get it right. And so I think then the question is, what do you then do with that? If you fail, what does failure mean, or what does failure look like, and what are the implications? And then it goes to, well, what's the cleanup job that you're responsible for afterwards? But I can think of an example where if you know, you can fail if you don't tell someone something. If you can fail, you know, to be, well, I should have spoken up, or I should have done this, or the team, you know, what does failure mean? You didn't deliver on something. Well, there could be a whole range of reasons, but I think blaming people, or, you know, it's not about any of that. It's about, okay, what happened, what went wrong, what do we do well, what are we going to do next time, and what was my role in that, and not being afraid to have those open, honest conversations. But to think you'll never fail just because you're in a leadership role happens not infrequently.
It's interesting we don't give our political leaders, we don't cut them that slack, do we? And we don't really want to dwell on political leaders today.
I mean, I think it's this expectation that, and it goes to this culture of speaking up, I think, and I don't think, you know, society is really just a microcosm, or our political leaders are in some ways reflective of the society. But I think it's this one about, you know, speaking up that it's okay, it should be okay. I certainly think there's a really vexed issue about leaders speaking up when they've had enough or they've hit a wall. Sometimes people don't know what to do with that, I think, is quite a real issue. And so that's when you're more likely to fail. And so, anyway, there's a complex list of issues in there, and I might throw to the others, but I think there's a lot of dependencies and what ifs in there.
We might just move on to the next question, because we have quite a few here, which is wonderful. What should leaders do if they need help or advice or support?
Ask for it. I encourage leaders to think about having coaching, and it's not an ad for coaching, but when I was a CEO, the first thing I did was have a coach. I had a coach, and then I had a buddy who ran a similar organisation, and we would just ring each other up. And
how often would you ring each other?
Oh,
was it a crisis that prompted that, or would you try and do it regularly?
A bit of both. But certainly, one of the biggest things for me, challenges, was around working well with the team. And so you can't talk to the team all the time about that. So you need to find somewhere else for that to happen. And so I would say that as a leader, you need to be constantly learning. Really.
I think it can be lonely at the top. Working with the team, it's your job to actually take the hits for the team, to protect them as far as a team should be protected. It doesn't mean that they're not held accountable, but a team should be protected from the buffets of life. Many people in large organisations find themselves in competition with their colleagues at the same level. And so to admit vulnerability, to admit weakness, to admit mistakes is to, in the views of some, to compromise their standing and their reputation. And so I think it's really important to actually develop a network of trusted colleagues whom you can talk to, who are sympathetic, who will keep their mouths shut, who can be trusted, and who perhaps can give you good advice. Certainly anybody I'm an expert in giving gratuitous advice, but hopefully you find someone who can give you thoughtful advice at particular times.
This is an interesting question that is especially, I think, topical if you're in the public service. Fran, I'll ask you this one. Can you be a good leader if you don't like the policy that the government has asked you to implement?
Couldn't possibly comment. No, just joking. Just joking. No, just joking. I mean, that's, if you're in the public service, your job is to implement the policy of the government of the day, and it's really that simple. And your own views really are immaterial in terms of when you actually got to do it. And and I can just think over my 30 plus years, you might think that someone might be well intentioned but have a silly idea. Some might just be a plain out pork barreling, whatever it might be. Absolutely. But I think for me it's about taking great pride in actually trying to do it as well as you can, not being afraid. I can think of examples where someone was yelling at me from a minister's office about, well, I didn't ask for that information, and just screaming at me at 10 o'clock one night. Say, well, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give you that information. If you want to swear, file it in the round bin, that's your problem. It's entirely your prerogative, but my job is to tell you it. And
frank and fearless advice.
Yeah, and I think that stuff it's about not being afraid to do that. But equally, it's also, you've got a job to do in the public service, and members of government have a job to do as well. And they're not always going to be in agreement, and you are but one source of advice to a member of parliament or a minister or whatever. But I think your job is to not be afraid to give it. But you can't let your personal views get in the way at all.
But it can be hard.
Yeah, I mean, it can be, or you know, especially I think as you get, you know, you can be cynical, you can be whatever if you're in an election, whatever. But at the end of the day, we're in a democracy, and at the end of the day, there's a public service there to serve the government of the day. I think you have to be upfront and honest about stuff that you think, but if I do think some of that stuff, if you have some deep problem and you're in the public service, then you shouldn't be if you struggle with that, to be honest.
On that note, time's up. Thank you, everyone.
So
I hope, viewers, you enjoyed our discussion today. Thank you very much for the questions, which were very stimulating, I thought. There'll be another webinar next month, so please stay tuned to Ethos CRS. Look on our website and send your questions in early once we get a topic. Thank you.